This week, I voted. I actually voted. I got the sticker to prove it. No, I didn't just spout out my opinions on social media and think in my mind that that would make a difference, because I am aware that our opinions and our beliefs mean absolutely nothing. They're a big part of our identity, but they mean nothing until there's action put behind those. So yes, I voted. Now, what's interesting is I voted for Trump. For 2020, I voted for Trump. Why is it interesting? You hear someone say that you expect them to be a Republican, but that's not the case. I am definitely not a Republican. I will say I feel that I equally distance myself from the Republican Party as much as I do the Democratic Party, because I'm aware, especially in American culture, it's all about tribalism. They're wrong, they're stupid, they're ignorant. Whatever, it's not much different than sports teams. And I do not want to be a part of that. You'd think, well, why didn't you vote Libertarian? And I did last election, I did. But ultimately, I don't feel personally that I need to be confined to only voting for Libertarian, which, let's face it, when I voted Libertarian the last election, that accounted for about, 3% of the vote nationwide, I believe. So I knew that in essence, quote, I was throwing away my vote. Now, personally, problematic for me, because the views of the Libertarian Party are 100% matched to how I see things. Whereas typically, with Republicans and Democrats, there's about half that I agree with both, and half that I disagree with both. But I'm remaining open-minded to voting for either party if I feel overall, largely enough, they can line up to my libertarian views. And I will even tell you this, that after watching the vice presidential debates, I really liked Kamala Harris. I really did. I really appreciated how well she communicated. Her level of emotional intelligence really stood out. So much so that I was thinking, well, okay, maybe I'll vote for Biden because of her, maybe. But I did my research, and I was thinking, what was that Joe Rogan video that I saw show up in my feed a while back? Well, I watched it, and then I started looking up credible sources that back up what was discussed in that video. So Kamala Harris, and don't take my word for it, look this up yourself. She has a problematic history of, by default, keeping people in prison that didn't belong there. People who are innocent, but she blocked access to them having the evidence that would prove their innocence, largely through DNA testing. And again, the word problematic, a lot of them actually being black. Well, she can't be racist. She's black herself. We have to look beyond that. We have to look at, there's a reoccurring history of her keeping people in prison, whether they're black or not. This happens, and this is problematic. So for me, and what I personally believe in, I definitely want to see prison reform. I want to see, specifically, there are so many black men and Hispanic men who are in prison, even serving for crimes that technically aren't even illegal anymore. Now that marijuana is not illegal in certain places, it would at least change the term that they're serving. So there needs to be a lot of reform in that regard. So for me personally, I am definitely pro-life. I'm against abortion. But I am aware of the Jim Croce song, Which Way Are You Going? Which the whole point of the song is, hey, you say you love the baby? Well, what about the man? What about when that baby is born and not aborted and grows up and then serves in our military? And then they lose their life serving for some political cause, not necessarily fighting for our freedom, but fighting for a political cause of the United States. What about that? Do we care about that? So I appreciate recently that Trump had said that he's really wanting to get the troops out of the Middle East. And I like that. I want to see less military involvement and all that. Focus more on taking care of our people here, especially, instead of policing the world. So that is something that is a libertarian concept that I can appreciate of Trump. And this concept of keeping people in prison, like you see a history of Kamala Harris doing, when I look at the moral meter of that, that was one of the tipping points for me when I saw that. And I think this is important for me to discuss because, again, I'm not a tribalistic Republican. I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Republican and I'm not a Democrat. But I think it's interesting for you to be watching this video because you can understand, let's face it, let's face how the elections work here in the United States. It's roughly 51% to 49%. It's split so evenly. And each time we have an election, it's 1 or 2% of the population that ultimately determine it. That's basically how it works, most elections. Usually it's not a landslide. Usually we're that divided in America, we're that polarized, that it's going to come down to a certain demographic of people, such as myself. Yes, there are the swing states, but there's also the swing voters. Absolutely, I'm the swing voter. So, because I do not want to be attached to a tribalistic mindset. So, it's interesting to hear from me because then you can understand what helped me swing to the Republican side for this vote. I'm still not identifying as a Republican. I'm just saying I voted for a Republican. Whereas the next election, I might vote Democrat, as I was thinking about doing until I learned more about Kamala Harris keeping innocent men in prison. So, what caused that to tip? I'll tell you probably something else that kind of led to this year. I was watching a comedian, Colin Quinn. He has a special on Netflix called Red State, Blue State. And he points out the good and the bad with both parties. One of the things, though, he points out about the Republican Party is they're actually cooler people. And Joe Rogan had basically implied this too recently on one of his videos. He says, what helped, one of the things that ultimately kind of previewed that Trump was going to win the last election is the memes. The memes about Trump were actually funny and kind of cool, and the ones against Hillary Clinton were not. Republicans, by default, are cooler people, laid back, just want to have fun. On the Democratic side, especially now, they're being seen as the people who have all the rules. Here's what you can't say. And you can watch most new specials on Netflix from the comedians, and they're complaining about this. They're tired of being told what they can and cannot say, this cancel culture. And I think we're starting to see a lot of people think, yeah, that's not fun. You're going to tell us what we can and cannot say and what we cannot laugh at and what we can't. That's not fun. It's like the grammar police, but even worse. And for me too, I think it's very odd, and people weren't talking about this earlier this year, but with all the stuff with COVID, it was very strange that it felt like from the Democrats, it felt like if you don't wear a mask all the time, you're a horrible person. Now, I'm the kind of person, I wear a mask when I'm required to, but other than that, I don't. I go to the gym 6 days a week, and no one in that gym wears a mask, and none of us have gotten COVID. That's my personal belief. But if you make me wear a mask, I will. But I thought it was very strange when at the hype of this COVID thing, you better wear a mask, you're a horrible person, a lot of that coming from the liberal side. Then all of a sudden there's all these protests, Black Lives Matter protest. So don't be around people, wear your mask anytime you get out. Okay, now you better go to your protest. That was strange to me. That was a mixed message. And I feel the same way about the mixed signals with, as far as climate change. You know, when you listen to the left side talk about climate change, they don't give you solutions. Basically, the solution is vote Democrat so that we can solve this. But what, so I'm just going to keep recycling my plastics and hope that saves the environment? When I don't hear a clear solution, I just hear someone talk about the problem and rallying around that, I immediately start questioning how valid that is. So for me, that's why in this election, I decided to vote for Trump. It seemed that ultimately, on a moral scale, I know that nobody's perfect, but when you look at Trump, I don't see immoral actions in the way that I would see keeping innocent people in prison, especially black men in prison, and keeping them from having access to their evidence that would free them. And seeing a history of that. Again, don't take my word for it. Look it up yourselves. And I want to be very clear. I'm not telling you to vote for Trump. I'm not telling you who to vote for. You have to make up that decision. But for me, a swing voter, this is how I came to my conclusion. Your comments are right here.